Beachbody Media presents a Seishindo Life Tools podcast by Charlie Badenhop and Tony Paget.
Hello, everyone. Today we will talk about how to forgive someone who has wronged you in the past. Moreover, we will talk about how to use positive intention to understand the potential reasons why this person did what they did, and how to use this understanding to let go of your resentment towards that other person. In the Seishindo way of thinking, holding resentment towards someone really doesn't help us in our daily lives and can actually be detrimental in living a healthy and positive lifestyle. So, Charlie, I think you were going to do something a bit different in today's podcast in starting us out. Is that right?
Yes. Today, rather than walking our audience through some theory, I'm going to tell a story that I've written about before, and I tell this story because I feel it offers some wonderful insights. And then later, I'll present the actual tool for today.
Okay, sounds great.
You know, many people struggle asking themselves if they, quote-unquote, should forgive someone, or telling themselves that they don't want to forgive the other person, and the whole time they feel unsettled, and deep down in their heart of hearts, they do want to forgive, but they just need to find the proper way to go about doing so. And that is what our tool is designed to help with. Let me give an example of how to approach forgiveness by relating a coaching session I had with a client quite some time ago. My client had a lot of resentment towards her mother for many things her mother had done to her in the past. And she said, I don't want to forgive my mother for what she did in the past. What she did was and is still wrong, and she has never apologized. And, you know, I hear this very same kind of statement from many clients who are living with resentment, whether it be towards their parents, their spouse, or their boss. So in the coaching session, I first explained to my client the difference between forgiving someone for what they have done and condoning what they've done.
And Charlie, yeah, that's an important difference, isn't it? As they say, the difference that makes the difference. So if I'm hearing you right, forgiving someone for what they have done does not at all mean that you have to condone what the other person has done. In other words, you don't have to feel what the other person did is okay in order to forgive them. Am I right on that, Charlie?
Yes, exactly. Couldn't have said it better myself. And in the coaching session that I was having, next I talked to my client about Nelson Mandela, who is my number one role model in regard to forgiveness. You know, if Nelson had remained angry, there's no telling just how bad things could have gotten in South Africa after he was released. And I believe the whole world is fortunate for the path of forgiveness that he chose. So I suggested to my client, I said the following: what I learned from Nelson Mandela is that in order to free ourselves from the pain of anger and resentment, we need to be able to forgive others. The longer we dwell on hurtful situations from the past, the longer we keep ourselves from living fully in the present. And in the process, we often bring about further pain and suffering. So forgiveness is actually an act of kindness, and it's an act of kindness to yourself, as it will release you from the pain you've been suffering and lead to new possibilities in your life and in your relationships. So having said that, I next asked my client if she felt that anyone other than herself was responsible for and capable of making her happy or unhappy. And after a rather long and convoluted discussion, she said that when it was all said and done, she realized that she was indeed the only one that could determine how she felt. And then we sat there together for a while, and I took a deep breath and suggested that my client do so as well. And next I said to her, here's an idea. What if, as a totally selfish act, done simply for your own personal happiness, you decided to go ahead and let go of the resentment you had towards your mom so that you would no longer need to have resentment clouding your life? What would that be like? So I gave her a moment or two to think about that, and I suggested you would not be saying that what was done to you was okay. You would simply be letting go of the resentment so that your own life would be happier. Would you want to let go of your resentment if it meant you would feel greater happiness overall in your life? And having said that, we sat there together for a while, and my client's face began to soften at some point. And she said that if she was able to let go of her resentment, it would be like lifting a weight from her shoulders and removing a dark cloud from her heart. And I said, well, with all you've been through, with all of the pain you have suffered, wouldn't it be a wonderful gift to give to yourself if you could lift this weight from your shoulders and remove the dark cloud from your heart? Wouldn't it be wonderful to be freed from your hurt and resentment? And then we sat there, and tears formed in her eyes, and she said very softly, yes, I want to feel good. I want to feel love. I want to feel free. So I said to her, well, in order to free yourself from pain and open your heart to love, are you willing to go so far as to forgive your mother if this is what you felt was necessary for your own personal happiness? And my client was somewhat hesitant, but she said yes. And then I said, well, remember, I'm suggesting that you do this purely for selfish reasons, not because you want to actually forgive your mom at this point in time, but because you want to free yourself to live a happier life. And my client said, yes, when it's said like this, I have the resolve to forgive my mother in order to free myself to live a happier life. And I said, good. Hold these thoughts and feelings in your heart for a while, and then we can talk about how to actually accomplish your forgiving as time goes on. And Tony, I'd just like to ask our listeners now, if you are holding on to any resentment and yet you want to recapture your happiness, would you be willing to undertake the radical act of forgiveness in order to free yourself? So there's my story and my question. And Tony, how about maybe a recap from you of a point or two that you take away from the story?
Sure, but before that, I just want to thank you for sharing that, Charlie. This is an excellent story. And I guess what I hear you saying is this, that if you have resentment or anger towards another person, that this kind of feeling tends to cloud your life in general, and that holding on to resentment or anger takes away from the quality of life, well, of your own life, in fact. And thus forgiving someone actually adds to the quality of one's own life, which makes forgiving someone an act of kindness to oneself. Have I recapped that correctly, Charlie?
Yes, absolutely, perfectly. And there's another point here, Tony. Most of us, certainly me, have done something naughty at least once in our lives, and perhaps even something illegal. So I don't like to sit as the judge and jury because I realize that others could also judge me harshly for things I've done in the past. So I think that in being less judgmental about others, we'll tend to be less judgmental about ourselves, and that's certainly a great gift to give ourselves.
Sure, but Charlie, let me just ask you this. Aren't there kind of like degrees of wrongness? Perhaps, let's say, I lied to someone, but another person, say, got into a physical fight with me on purpose. Aren't I more, quote-unquote, right than the other person? Wouldn't it be easier to forgive the lie than the beating?
Well, that's an interesting set of thoughts. First, I would say that we will often tend to consider ourselves more right than someone else, but what does that appraisal really accomplish for us? You see, I think that when I say I am more right than you, in some way that equals I am better than you, doesn't it?
Yeah, okay. I see your point. That's a good point. I didn't think about it that. Okay, sorry to interrupt. Please continue.
No, it's a good point because as far as degrees of being wronged, if I remember correctly, Nelson Mandela was in jail for more than 20 years, beaten, tortured, at times not fed. So he could have easily stood up in a high place and announced that he was righteous in wanting to punish the people that wronged him. But instead, he chose a path of reconciliation. And as I say, I think the whole world has benefited from this example, from his example. So that's my story for today, and now I'm ready to get onto the tool.
Okay, let's dive right in.
Okay, but before diving, first, some important caveats to begin with.
Sure.
First caveat, using this tool for forgiveness will not necessarily require that you make an actual statement of forgiveness to the other person. The important thing to do is to forgive the person in your own heart. This is what will lead you to have greater peace of mind. A second caveat, is that we're going to assume that you have some form of personal relationship with the other person. You might also have gotten cheated or wronged by someone you barely know, and today's tool could work in such circumstances, but assuming you already have a relationship with the other person will allow for a clearer example. A third and final caveat is this. You might not find that each and every question in this tool speaks directly to your experience, but no worries in this regard. If a certain question does not match your experience, please just continue on to the next question. No matter what, this tool can offer you a great deal of value.
Okay, good. So 3 caveats. Number 1, when you're using this tool of forgiveness, you don't necessarily have to make a statement of forgiveness to the other person. Number 2, the second caveat is that it's best if you have a personal relationship with the other person when using this tool. And number 3, the third and final caveat, is not every question will be speaking to you directly for your experience. If that's the case, you could just continue on to the next question. Do I have the 3 caveats right, Charlie?
Yes, that's it.
Okay, good. So how about going into the tool itself?
Yes, and today, to give a concrete example for today's tool, I want to talk about my relationship with my dad, who passed away in May of this year. And to me, it's a powerful example, and I hope our audience will appreciate it. So, step 1, name how you were wronged in as simple a manner as possible. Be careful to not launch into a story about what happened. Keep your description short and simple.
And Charlie, just if I can ask, and by being quote-unquote wronged, this could mean more than just one instance, right? You're not just talking about one simple instance.
Sure, you could have been robbed once, you could have been harshly punished many times, or your older sibling, for instance, could have lied to your parents about you many times. The important point is that you're feeling resentment. So in my case, my simple statement is that my dad was often very harsh, and when he lost his temper, a beating was not unusual, and he also tended to find fault with most everything I did. So that's my simple statement. It could even be perhaps a little simpler than that, but that's my statement for now. And other examples could be, for instance, my boss dislikes me and discriminates against me because we don't have the same religion. Or another example could be, my spouse finds fault with most everything I do, no matter how hard I try.
Okay, simple enough, yet perhaps not a simple situation. I believe that takes us on to step 2.
Step 2, name and note the positive qualities of the person you have resentment towards.
Just a second. That would seem kind of hard to do in this situation, especially if you're feeling resentment towards the other person, no?
Yes, this may not be easy, but the importance of the step is often when we're upset with someone, we think of them in a very narrow, one-dimensional way, seeing only their faults. And when we do this, it leads us to have an unbalanced opinion of the other person, and that makes it easier for us to find fault with them.
But Charlie, why is this step important? Can I just do this tool and not have to note their positive traits?
Well, again, I think it's important to have a rather complete understanding of the other person, so we'll be less likely to demonize them. And indeed, each and every person, no matter how angry you might be at them, does have positive qualities. So why hesitate to note what these qualities are? And again, by doing so, you are not meant to be making what the other person did okay. Okay.
I guess that makes sense. Thanks for that.
Yeah, and let's see if it makes even more sense after I give you my example.
Yeah, sure, please.
My dad could be very kind and helpful at times, and he would not hesitate to defend me if he felt I was receiving unfair treatment from others. And then, as a New York City fireman, he displayed great courage and caring for others. And even when I make these statements now, I have a stirring of appreciation for my father because, indeed, when 9/11 occurred and so many firemen lost their lives in the city of New York, or giving service to the city of New York, even though my father had retired a long time ago, I wound up feeling great respect for my father and the many times he risked his life over the course of his career.
Wow, Charlie, thanks very much for sharing your thoughts, and I really appreciate that.
Yes, and, Tony, for instance, you didn't actually know my dad, but In saying what I just said, do you see how this really changes the emotional tone of where we're going?
Yeah, absolutely. Now I got what you're trying to accomplish in the steps
Good.
and the value of the step. Thank you very much.
Yeah, excellent.
Great, thanks. I do think that takes us on to step 3, though.
Step 3. Ask yourself what the positive intention of the other person might have been when they wronged you. And as always, you'll be making a supposition here. And as always, it's important to realize that in coming up with the other person's positive intention, we're not looking to condone what they did or make it somehow okay.
Okay, but Charlie, sorry, maybe I'm sounding like a broken record here, but why is this step important? In other words, understanding the person's positive intention. How does this understanding add value to this tool?
Well, in Seishindo, we suppose positive intention because we find in the long run it leads to our having a more emotionally fulfilling experience in life. And just like the act of forgiveness, we're using positive intention to make our life better, and that's why we're using it. And we believe in positive intention as a way to serve ourselves, right, and be more compassionate. And even though we very definitely believe in positive intention, we also importantly understand that at times, often perhaps, people engage in lousy strategies to fulfill their positive intention. And that's also an important point to note here. Realizing a person's positive intention does not at all mean that they had a good way of expressing their positive intention. And that's likely exactly where the breakdown begins in a relationship.
Okay, well, maybe to make it clear for me, how about if you give me an example again?
Well, sure. And working the whole time with my relationship with my dad, in my case, my father stated many times that his positive intention, by criticizing me and at times hitting me and stuff, that his positive intention was that he wanted me to be a responsible person who was well respected and excelled in life. And I do for sure take this to be a high quality positive intention. I just wish he could have accomplished his positive intention in a more caring manner. And in making a clear statement of my father's positive intention, I'm led to demonize him a whole lot less. And again, this is very important.
Well, Charlie, are you saying that your father's positive intention was to have you be a responsible person, but his strategy to fulfill that positive intention, I'm sorry to laugh, but it just sounds kind of strange, was to treat you harshly and offer you a lot of negativity? I'm not sure I make the connection here.
Well, okay, let me give an example like this.
Mm-hmm.
If you would like to help your son maximize his skills as a basketball player,
right,
you could go on and on pointing out to him every mistake he made and suggesting what he should be doing differently and better.
Sure.
Rather than at all telling him what he was doing well. And if you took this critical approach with your son, always criticizing him, your son might soon lose his interest in playing basketball. So your positive intention, which was to help him be a better player, would not be matched with a generative strategy for fulfilling your intention.
Okay.
So, my father himself was an honest, well-respected person at work and in our local community, and he very much wanted to make sure that I was the same. So, once again, he had a fine positive intention, but the way that he went about, the strategy that he used to fulfill that intention was less than stellar, shall we say.
Okay. I think I got it. Thanks for explaining that. That makes sense to me now. Does that lead us to the next step?
Yes, next step. Step 4. Consider if you might have done something to make wrongful actions by the other person all the more likely. And this one's a little bit of a tricky one, and it might not be the case, but good to consider nonetheless. And let me give you some points to consider here. When we ask you to take this point into consideration, we are not suggesting, or I am not suggesting, that perhaps you should take part of the blame for what has transpired. In general, we do not play the blame game in Seishindo, and here's what I mean in this regard. let's say I was new in a town and had too much to drink, and I started aimlessly wandering the streets after leaving a bar. And at some point I get mugged by 3 guys. I would not be to blame for my mugging, and I would not condone having been mugged because I had had too much to drink. But if I hadn't been inebriated in the first place, chances are I would have gone straight home after leaving the bar. Or, here's another example. Often we get cheated. When we do get cheated, it revolves around someone offering us something that seemed, quote-unquote, too good to be true. And then, indeed, it turns out that it was too good to be true. They were actually cheating us. And the way we got cheated was we blinded ourselves by what we wanted, and in the process, we lost touch with what is just and likely. So this question simply asks you to gently look at whether or not you might have unwittingly played some role in fostering the bad behavior you were the recipient of. And again, in no way, shape, or form does that mean that you have to condone in any way what was done. And, you know, in doing this step, you can simply help yourself to have a fuller understanding of the circumstances involved.
Okay, well, let me bring it back to the example of your father, Charlie. Is there something that you perhaps did to make his harsh treatment even more likely?
You know, I have, of course, thought about this prior to the podcast. And, you know, in the situation of my dad and I think I could say which came first, the chicken or the egg. So with my dad, I could say that at times I took pleasure in annoying him and rarely looked to do anything that would please him. And needless to say, that would only make him more upset with me over time. You know, so yes, I did play a role in the whole dynamic, and in realizing this, it helped me to soften my opinion of my dad. And you know, guess what? Yes, I would like to say that if he had been more loving, I would have been more loving. But frankly, that's purely supposition, and there's no way I can prove that that would have been the case. And also, making such a statement on some level would be a way to make me feel more righteous than my father and to make my father more wrong, which is not a good thing to do. So I clearly refrain from making such a statement about who's the most right or who's the most wrong.
Good point, Charlie. And just to be clear for this step in general, yeah, it may be the case that we did nothing to contribute to the wrong done by the other person. So, but it's good to check in nonetheless. Is that right? Yeah,
good to check in. I mean, a woman could be walking down the street and some guy, you know, runs by and snatches her purse. You know, chances are she had zero to do with that. The guy was just looking for a purse to steal.
Sure. Great. Okay, thanks for that. All right, I think that leads on to the next step, step 5.
Sure. Step 5. Ask yourself the following. Does my continued resentment towards the other person add to the overall quality of my life or detract from the overall quality of my life? And one thing that's important here is that the greater the perceived wrongdoing, the more often you will be thinking about it. So the greater the perceived wrongdoing, the more you can benefit from letting go of your resentment. And frankly, I would be hard put to believe that resentment adds to the quality of anyone's life. So what's your thoughts on this, Tony?
Well, yeah, Charlie, I would agree. I really can't think of any reason why someone would hold on to resentment and they would think it would add to the quality of their own life. So my question to you would be, why even have this step, since I think it's kind of a given?
I think this step is important because it's one of the places where people get stuck. They don't realize that by maintaining resentment, they're basically punishing themselves.
Okay, well, good point. But let me take it back to your example with your father. How did you come to realize that your resentment towards your father was actually a form of punishing yourself?
Well, in regard to my dad, I came to understand that my resentment towards him wound up giving me a testy attitude in general and a disdain for most people in power.
Mm-hmm.
So I came to realize a number of years ago that forgiving my dad and working on improving our relationship was in my own best interest because it helped me to fit into other life situations in a better way.
Okay. All right. I think that makes sense. Great. I think we're now at step 6. Is that right?
Step 6. Here it is. Does this is the question, does remaining resentful in some way keep you tied to a limiting version of the past where you feel like a victim? Does maintaining your resentment make it less likely that you will have the future you truly desire? And in regard to me and my dad, this seemed like an obvious fact to me after a while, because when I used to actively complain about him, I realized that it wound up really coloring my perception of life. My complaining about him led me to complain about other situations and people as well, and it gave me a certain false sense, once again, of being righteous.
Very, very good point. Thank you. Let's see. Step 7 then, yes?
Step 7. What benefits, question again you ask yourself, what benefits have accrued to you because of your experience with this other person?
Wow, that's another powerful statement you're making there, Charlie, and perhaps a difficult question to answer, no?
Well, I usually find that the difficult questions are the ones that bear the most fruit. And yes, you might find this question surprising at first, but I firmly believe that every situation we're involved in does have the capacity to teach us life-affirming lessons. You see, even though you might never have thought of a certain incident or relationship as a gift, there is a potential gift awaiting you once you open up to receiving it. So, in regard to my dad, I know that my relationship with him taught me how to stand my ground when necessary, and it also likely played an important role in my studying Aikido, because I wanted to learn how to protect myself without needing to harm others. And also, my general disdain for authority, which at times was a negative, a minus, but my disdain for authority also definitely played an important role in my being an entrepreneur my whole life, and I have benefited greatly from this. And I can definitely say I feel a bond with Frank Sinatra when he sings, "I Did It My Way."
Hopefully no singing today. But I that's for sure. You're definitely a unique individual, Charlie. Okay, sorry. I think that takes us on to the next step, yes?
Yes, step 8. Question. Deep down in your heart of hearts, would you not like to have a better relationship with this other person? And, once again, in regard to my father, this point became obvious after a while that I did really want to have a better relationship with him. And I was especially aware of this when I was in the presence of a father and son who had a great relationship with each other. And at such times, I wish that my father and I could have had a similar relationship.
All right. Thank you for that. I believe that leads us to the final step number 9.
Ninth and final step, you ask yourself this. What if, as a totally selfish act, done simply for my own personal happiness, I decided to go ahead and let go of the resentment I have towards the other person that wronged me? What will I do to actually go ahead and forgive them? So, let me tell you what I did with my dad as one of the many possible examples of forgiving someone. My father passed away at the age of 93, having very definitely lived a full life. And I arrived at his bedside in Atlanta, about 5 days before he died. And on one particular day when my dad was fairly lucid, I told him the following. Dad, when it's all said and done, I want to thank you for all that you gave me in my life. And I know you always tried to be the best dad you could be. And I'm sorry that I was so unable to express the love and appreciation for you that I truly felt. And, my dad, bless his soul, my dad being my dad, he replied with the following. You are some crazy son of a bitch, aren't you? You don't expect me to believe that, do you?
Oh, wow.
And I said, well, Dad, I hope you will believe me because it's true. And he said nothing after that and closed his eyes and dozed off. And to me, or for me, by saying what I did, I feel that I gave myself a great parting gift. And I'm pretty certain it was a nice gift to him, even though, he was so used to being brusque that he couldn't actually say thank you. So I felt really wonderful to have been able to summon up the caring, the appreciation, and the courage to let me say what I said to him.
Wow, I don't know what to say, Charlie. But just thank you for sharing such a very personal and touching story as an example for this tool. Thanks for that. But a thought came into my mind. What if it seems really difficult for our listeners to approach the other person like you did in this example?
Well, that's why I think it was the first caveat where I said in the beginning that you do not at all necessarily have to interact with the other person and make any kind of direct statement to them in order to forgive them. So, for instance, and I've had clients do this, and it's had wonderful, wonderful results for them. You might want to go ahead and write a letter to the other person that you never send. Or, of course, you might want to write a letter to them and send it to them, but I would just say if you're going to send them something, no emails, please, huh?
Sure. So a personally written letter, not an electronic form.
Yes. And, when you write that letter, and imagine you were going to get something like published in a magazine or something, I mean, really work on the wording and make it a statement of forgiveness without putting in any of your, still remaining resentment or anger or angst. So the idea is to find a way to let your heart soften around the whole situation so you can be more open to giving and receiving love.
Wow, some great examples there, Charlie. I really appreciate that. Thanks for that. I believe that finishes the tool, yeah?
Yes, that's the entire process with the tool. And there's 9 steps, and chances are people will want to listen to this podcast more than once if they want to use the tool. But I think it's a good, complete tool.
Well, that's great. Thanks for that, Charlie, as always. And before we do finally sign off, I just want to remind everyone that if you want to contact us, you can email us at life-tools, what's the S, at seishindo.org. That's life-tools at seishindo.org. Or you can visit our website at seishindo.org. Again, Charlie, thank you very much for today, and I'll be talking to you again soon.
Okay, thanks, Tony. Bye-bye.